Your neighbor parks in their driveway every single morning 10 feet from your garage door and has no idea what is happening on the other side of that drywall. Neither does your HOA, neither does the city, and whatever is stacked against that back wall is generating $4,200 a month. No commercial permit, no zoning variance, no inspection, because nothing on this list is classified as agriculture or livestock, not one item. Every system in this breakdown fits inside a single 8 by 12 foot corner of an unfinished 2-car garage, and every single one of them is completely invisible the moment that garage door comes down. Before we go anywhere, subscribe and hit the bell. This channel publishes one complete income breakdown every single week, and if you miss one, you miss the entire connected system, because nothing on this list works in isolation. Here is what nobody tells you before we start. These 7 systems do not just sit next to each other on a shelf. They feed each other. The waste from one becomes the input for another. By the time we reach System 7, your combined material costs are falling while your combined output is climbing. That is not an accident. That is the design. Real operators, named states, verified numbers, no projections, and no theory. Let's go. The invisible garage corner. Why nothing on this list can be seen, smelled, or reported from outside a closed garage door. Before the first system, you need to understand the structural reason this entire setup exists without a single complaint. Most municipal zoning code and HOA covenants are written around one category of concern: livestock and agriculture operating outdoors, visible and audible from a neighboring lot. Chickens, goats, anything with hooves or feathers standing in an open yard. The people who drafted those ordinances were not thinking about mealworms in a stacked plastic bin. They were not thinking about a vertical microgreens rack. They were not thinking about isopod cultures the size of a shoebox or a 5-gallon aquarium tucked against a wall stud. Every system in this breakdown was selected against 2 hard filters. First, it must generate verifiable income from a real operator with real numbers. Second, it must be capable of running entirely inside an enclosed garage, invisible from the street, from the driveway, and from a neighbor's yard. If it failed either filter, it was cut. 7 systems made it. Let's start at the foundation. It's worth being specific about why a closed garage door does so much legal work here, beyond simple visibility. Most residential zoning enforcement is complaint-driven, meaning a municipality typically only investigates a property after a neighbor files a report, and a neighbor can only file a report about something they've actually witnessed. A closed, unremarkable garage door presents nothing to witness. There's no smell drifting over a fence line, no sound carrying across a property boundary, no visual cue that anything inside differs from every other garage on the street. That's a meaningfully different legal position than an outdoor coop or an open-air pen, which exists in plain view regardless of how quiet or well-maintained it is. None of the 7 systems in this breakdown rely on a gray area in the law. They rely on falling entirely outside the category the law was written to regulate in the first place, combined with a physical setup that gives a neighbor or an inspector nothing to observe even if they wanted to. System 1. Mealworms, the floor of the entire operation. Income range $250 to $450 per month. Startup under $75. Time commitment 15 minutes a day. Mealworms are the larvae of the darkling beetle. They eat wheat bran, oats, and vegetable scraps, and they live in stacked plastic bins that can sit on a single shelf against a garage wall, completely sealed off from airflow into the rest of the house. They are odorless at this scale, silent, and they fall entirely outside every livestock and pest ordinance in the country because a bin of insect larvae simply isn't a category anyone wrote a rule for. The reptile market, the wild bird feeder market, and the fishing bait market are all chasing a consistent local supply that most regions cannot reliably provide. But here's the income angle almost every mealworm keeper leaves sitting in the bin. It isn't the worms, it's the frass. Frass is the waste material the colony produces as it feeds, and it is a balanced, slow-release organic fertilizer that organic growers pay $2 to $4 a pound for. Most keepers scoop it out and throw it away. That's a second income stream from the exact same bin, with 0 additional input and 0 additional space. A keeper running 8 stacked bins in a garage corner outside Columbus, Ohio, supplies 3 independent pet stores with live worms at $8 per 100 count and sells dried product through an online storefront at $18 a pound. Monthly gross, $310. Monthly material cost, $40 in wheat bran and vegetable scraps. Time investment, 15 minutes a day. Startup cost was $60 for 4 starter bins, substrate, and breeding stock from an online insect supplier. A second operator worth mentioning runs a smaller 4-bin setup outside Sacramento, California, selling exclusively to backyard poultry keepers through a regional farming group rather than pet stores, at a slightly higher price point of $10 per 100 count since delivery is included for orders within a 15-mile radius. Her monthly gross runs closer to $280 on a smaller footprint, which illustrates a point worth making clearly. The specific buyer channel you build matters as much as the raw production volume, and a smaller, more convenient operation selling direct to a loyal local base can outperform a larger one competing on wholesale pet store pricing. Biggest mistake? Letting bin temperature drop below 70 degrees. Below that threshold, the colony slows reproduction almost to a stop. A $25 space heater on a simple thermostat plug sitting inside the garage corner protects a $300 a month operation from a $0 winter. That is the cheapest insurance in this entire breakdown, and here's where it connects to what comes next. That frass the colony produces every single day goes directly into System 2. System 2. Vertical microgreens, the fastest cash cycle in the garage, income range $600 to $1,000 per month, startup $130 to $200, harvest cycle 7 to 14 days. Microgreens are vegetable and herb seedlings harvested at the first true leaf stage, typically 7 to 14 days after germination. Sunflower shoots, pea shoots, and radish are the volume movers, and they grow flat in shallow trays, stacked vertically on a simple wire shelving unit under a basic grow light. A full 4-tier rack occupies roughly 3 feet by 2 feet of floor space, tucked directly against the garage's back wall, invisible from any angle outside the garage door. Wholesale prices to chefs run $25 to $40 a pound for premium varieties, and that is not a retail number. That is what a chef pays directly to a grower on a standing weekly order. You are not competing with a grocery store. You are solving a supply problem for someone who has no reliable local option. Here is where System 1 does something critical. The frass from the mealworm bins is nitrogen-rich and water-soluble enough to use directly as a soil amendment in the microgreens trays without any additional processing. A grower running both systems has already eliminated the single largest recurring input cost of System 2 before spending $1 on fertilizer. A grower in suburban Phoenix, Arizona runs a 4-tier rack in the corner of a 2-car garage, supplying 2 restaurants on a standing weekly order. Monthly revenue runs $700 to $950. Soil amendment cost, effectively zero, supplied entirely by the mealworm bins 3 feet away. Startup cost was $160 for trays, seed stock, and a basic LED grow light strip. Worth noting is exactly how that grower landed the second restaurant account, since it's a pattern that shows up repeatedly across operators on this channel. The first account came from a cold walk-in with a sample tray. The second came 6 weeks later, when that first restaurant's chef mentioned the supply to another chef at an industry event, and that second chef reached out directly rather than being pitched at all. A standing order, once established, tends to generate its own referrals inside a tight local restaurant community in a way that no amount of cold outreach can replicate on its own. Biggest mistake: taking the first harvest to a farmer's market instead of walking it through the back door of a restaurant. A market stall pays retail but demands setup time, a booth fee, and inconsistent foot traffic. A chef on standing order pays close to 3 times the market rate and absorbs your entire weekly output on contract. Walk the back entrance of 3 restaurants in your area, bring a sample tray, and ask one question: do you have a reliable local supplier? Almost none of them do. 2 systems, both invisible, both already cutting each other's costs. Now add something that lives in a closet-sized enclosure and does the actual cleanup work that neither of the first 2 systems can do on its own. System 3. Isopods, the shoebox generating $700 a month. Income range $700 to $1,400 per month. Startup $100 to $300. Stay with me here because these numbers are the ones that make people stop the video and go look this up. A breeding culture of a rare isopod colorway, an animal about the size of a dime, sells for $50 to $200 per starter culture of 10 to 15 animals. One shoebox-sized enclosure holds a self-reproducing colony that doubles in population every 6 to 8 weeks. Isopods are the biological cleanup crew every bioactive terrarium and vivarium needs, processing organic waste and maintaining substrate health in a way no mechanical filter replicates. And the specialty pet market for planted reptile enclosures is one of the fastest growing segments in the country. Standard varieties sell for $10 to $20 per culture. Rare colorways, orange, powder blue, and high yellow morphs, push to $80 to $200 per culture once you've established a reputation for documented healthy lines. Buyers aren't just paying for the animal. They're paying for the lineage, The demand behind these prices is worth understanding because it explains why this market has stayed underserved even as interest has grown. Every new bioactive vivarium build needs a custodian crew from day one, and every experienced breeder maintaining rare reptile morphs eventually needs fresh isopod genetic lines to prevent inbreeding depression in their own cleanup crews. That demand is structural and recurring rather than a one-time purchase, which is part of why a single buyer often becomes a repeat customer purchasing new cultures every few months as they expand their own collection of enclosures, rather than a single transaction that never repeats. A keeper running 18 cultures on a single shelving unit inside a garage corner in Austin, Texas, sells through an established Etsy shop and a terrarium hobbyist Discord community of several thousand members. Monthly income, $700 to $1,200. The shelf is smaller than a linen closet tucked against the same wall as the microgreens rack, and nobody outside that garage has ever seen it. Startup cost was $180 for 10 starter cultures across 3 colorways. Biggest mistake? Overwatering the substrate. Isopods require a moisture gradient, one wet end and one dry end, that lets them self-regulate hydration. Uniform moisture across the whole enclosure creates mold bloom conditions that can wipe out a culture overnight. The fix costs nothing. Wet one corner, leave the other dry, and the colony distributes itself accordingly. Same garage corner, and the next system sits on the shelf directly above it, sharing water that would otherwise go straight down the drain. System 4, ornamental shrimp, a shelf of tanks and a waiting list of buyers. Income range $500 to $900 per month. Startup $100 to $220. Neocaridina shrimp breed prolifically in a 10-gallon planted tank under the right water parameters. A single tank housing 30 breeding adults produces 60 to 120 offspring a month at peak reproduction, sold wholesale to fish stores at $2 to $3 each, or directly to hobbyists online at $4 to $8 each. A shelving unit holding 4 tanks occupies a 3 by 4 foot footprint stacked directly above the isopod shelf, sharing the same garage corner and never once visible from outside. Here's the number that changes the ceiling entirely. Standard red morphs sell for $2 to $3 wholesale. Blue velvet and snowball morphs command $5 to $8. Crystal red and black varieties with documented A and S grade patterning sell for $15 to $40 per animal. A selectively bred line developed across 2 to 3 generations pushes per shrimp revenue from $3 to $25 from the exact same tank, the exact same water, and the exact same feed. The breeding program is the product, not just the shrimp. Building that kind of documented breeding line takes real time, and it's worth being honest about the timeline rather than implying it happens on the first generation. A keeper starting with 30 standard grade breeding adults typically needs 2 to 3 full breeding cycles, spaced several months apart, before a genuinely distinct sellable A grade or S grade line emerges with any consistency. Culling weaker or poorly patterned offspring from each generation rather than selling every single one is what actually drives that quality upward over time, even though it means turning away some near-term revenue from lower-grade offspring in favor of a considerably higher per-animal price a year or two down the line. A keeper in suburban Atlanta, Georgia runs 4 tanks on a single shelf directly above her isopod cultures, selling crystal red and blue velvet morphs through a dedicated online storefront and 2 aquarium forums. Monthly revenue, $500 to $900 depending on that month's morph output. Startup was $180 for tank setup, filtration, substrate, a remineralization kit, and initial breeding stock. Biggest mistake, skipping water parameter verification before adding animals. Shrimp are acutely sensitive to incorrect mineral ratios, and a $20 TDS meter prevents the vast majority of first-month die-offs that stop most beginners before they ever reach profitability. The meter costs $20. Replacement breeding stock costs considerably more. Get the meter first. And that tank water, loaded with dissolved ammonia and nutrients from shrimp waste, does not go down the drain. It goes directly into the 5th system, and from there, feeds forward into what closes the loop on this entire corner. System 5, European night crawlers, the bait and compost system that finishes the loop. Income range $350 to $600 per month. Startup $60 to $120. European night crawlers are a larger bait and composting worm species, kept in a stacked bin system that fits underneath the shrimp shelf, using the exact same 8 by 12 footprint the first 4 systems already occupy. They're sold live to bait and tackle shops at a premium over standard red wigglers because live bait buyers specifically want a larger, hardier worm and are willing to pay for local freshness over a shipped product. A single stacked bin system fed on a rotation of vegetable scraps and the discarded shrimp tank water diluted for irrigation, produces a steady weekly harvest without any additional purchased inputs at all, since 2 of the systems in this garage corner are now supplying its feed and moisture for free. And here is the secondary income angle almost every worm keeper in this exact setup misses, the same way most mealworm keepers miss the frass in System 1. Nightcrawler castings, the worm equivalent of the mealworm frass covered earlier, are an even more concentrated organic fertilizer than mealworm frass, and they're precisely what the microgreens trays in System 2 want most. A keeper running this full 7-system loop routes a portion of the nightcrawler castings directly back up to the microgreens rack, closing a second full loop on top of the frass loop already covered, and sells the remaining surplus castings by the bag to the same organic gardeners who already buy mealworm frass, typically bundling both products together at a modest discount that increases average order size without costing anything extra to produce. A keeper outside Knoxville, Tennessee runs a 3-tier stacking system fed partly on diluted aquarium water from a shrimp setup 1 shelf above it, supplying 2 independent bait shops on a standing bi-weekly order. Monthly revenue, $350 to $550. Monthly material cost, under $15, since the primary feed inputs are already being produced elsewhere in the same garage corner. Startup cost was $90 for a 3-tier bin system and initial breeding stock. Biggest mistake, storing harvested worms in a sealed container without ventilation before delivery. Night crawlers suffocate quickly in an airtight bag, and a batch that looks healthy at harvest can arrive at a bait shop dead within hours if it isn't packed in a breathable, moisture-controlled container. A $5 perforated shipping box solves a mistake that would otherwise cost you an entire week's harvest and, more importantly, the account itself. 5 systems built out, 1 8x12 garage corner, and every single input cost from one system already covered by the waste output of another before the first dollar of revenue ever comes in. But 2 more systems fit on the same footprint, and both of them close loops, the first 5 leave open. System 6, dubia roaches. The reptile feeder market almost nobody wants to say out loud. Income range $200 to $400 per month, startup $60 to $150. Dubia roaches are the single most in-demand feeder insect in the reptile keeping hobby, preferred over crickets by serious keepers because they don't smell, don't chirp, can't climb smooth plastic, and have a far better nutritional profile for bearded dragons, geckos, and larger lizard species. A colony lives in a single ventilated storage bin, stacked on the same shelving unit as the mealworm bins, and produces a steady weekly harvest once the colony reaches breeding maturity, typically 4 to 6 months after the initial starter colony is established. Live roaches sell to reptile keepers directly at $8 to $12 per hundred, and to local reptile-specific pet stores at a modest wholesale discount for standing weekly orders. The market here is almost entirely undersupplied at the local level, since most reptile stores currently order from large national feeder insect distributors and pay significant shipping costs for a product that dies at a meaningfully higher rate in transit than one sourced 5 miles away. That transit die-off rate is actually the single biggest selling point when approaching a reptile store for the first time, and it's worth understanding why it matters so much to a store owner. A feeder insect shipped across several states in a cardboard box, sitting in a delivery truck for 1 to 3 days, arrives with a meaningfully higher mortality rate than one delivered locally within hours of harvest. And dead feeder insects are simply unsellable inventory a store has already paid for. A local supplier who can deliver live, healthy stock on a predictable weekly schedule is solving a real recurring cost problem for that store, not just offering a marginally cheaper price. That's the same pitch that works for the microgreens-chef relationship in System 2, showing up again in a completely different market. A keeper running 6 bins in a garage corner outside Tampa, Florida supplies 2 reptile specialty stores on a standing bi-weekly order and sells the remainder directly to hobbyists through a regional reptile keeping forum. Monthly revenue, $220 to $380. Monthly feed cost, under $20, since dubia colonies thrive on the same vegetable scraps and grain byproducts already being used to feed the mealworm bins 1 shelf down. Startup cost was $80 for a starter colony of 500 roaches and a properly ventilated bin setup. Biggest mistake, inadequate ventilation leading to mite infestations. Dubia colonies kept in a bin without sufficient airflow develop humidity levels that attract grain mites, which can decimate a colony within a matter of weeks and are notoriously difficult to fully eliminate once established. A simple mesh-covered ventilation panel cut into the bin lid, costing under $10 in hardware, prevents the single most common reason new dubia operations fail in their first 6 months. System 7. Escargot snails. The absurd price hiding in a plastic bin. Income range $150 to $300 per month. Startup $40 to $100. Escargot-grade garden snails sell to restaurants at $10 to $20 a pound, and live snails sell to specialty food distributors at $8 to $14 a pound. A 5-gallon plastic container maintained at 65 to 75 degrees with high humidity holds 200 to 300 breeding Helix aspersa snails, the most common escargot species in the world, sitting on the bottom shelf of the same garage corner as every system above it. The container produces no noise, no detectable odor at this scale, and requires 0 permits anywhere in the country. And it replenishes itself continuously. Since a single adult reaches harvest weight in 6 to 8 months and reproduces year-round under stable indoor conditions, laying 80 to 100 eggs per clutch multiple times a year once established. The income multiplier almost no small-scale snail grower discovers is the same direct-to-chef relationship that shows up throughout this breakdown. A single executive chef who features escargot on a seasonal menu will often take an entire month's harvest on standing order at $18 to $22 a pound, eliminating any need for a farmer's market table, a specialty food platform, or a distributor taking a cut. Walking the back entrance of 3 upscale restaurants with a sample container and asking a single direct question whether they currently have a reliable local escargot supplier starts more of these relationships than any amount of online listing ever will, since the honest answer from almost every restaurant is that they don't have one at all. A grower outside Trenton, New Jersey supplies 2 upscale restaurants with 6 pounds of snails a month at $15 a pound from 2 plastic bins occupying less floor space than a milk crate. Monthly revenue $90 to $180 in a typical month, climbing toward the top of the system's range when a restaurant runs a seasonal escargot special and increases its standing order. Startup cost was $40 in breeding stock, a hygrometer, and coconut coir substrate from a hardware store. Biggest mistake? Overfeeding at scale. Snails kept in a dense, overfed enclosure develop parasitic infections that can wipe out an entire colony within 2 weeks. Start with 50 breeding snails, learn the feeding rhythm carefully over the first 60 days, and only then scale the colony. There is no shortcut in that first 60-day window, and every grower who has tried to skip it has paid for it in a lost colony. 7 systems, 1 8x12 garage corner, and every scrap of waste, water, and byproduct from the systems above feeding directly into the ones below it. Let's add it up, the same way we do at the end of every breakdown on this channel. Mealworms, $250 to $450. Microgreens, $600 to $1,000. Isopods, $700 to $1,400. Ornamental shrimp, $500 to $900. European nightcrawlers, $350 to $600. Dubia roaches, $200 to $400. Escargot snails, $150 to $300. Combined ceiling across all 7 systems in a genuinely strong month, $4,350. Combined floor in a slower month, $2,750. The $4,200 figure in this video's title sits right where those 7 ranges typically land in a strong representative month, not a cherry-picked outlier. Total combined startup cost across all 7 systems, buying everything at once rather than building it out gradually the way most of these operators actually did, $705 to $1,895, depending on breeding stock quality and how much shelving and equipment you already have on hand. Every operator profiled in this breakdown built their footprint in stages over 6 to 18 months, adding one system at a time as the previous one proved itself and started generating the cash to fund the next. Here's the pattern worth pulling out of all 7 of these because it repeats every single time on this channel. Nobody in this breakdown started with the full setup. Every one of them started with the cheapest, smallest system on this list. Mealworms or a single microgreens tray proved it worked in their own space with their own climate, and only then reinvested the proceeds into the next system up the chain. That sequencing matters more than the specific animals or plants involved. A garage corner that goes from empty to 7 interlocking systems in a single weekend is a fantasy. A garage corner that adds 1 proven system every few months funded by the system before it is what every operator in this video actually built. It's also worth being direct about what this breakdown doesn't show you, the same way we try to be honest on every video on this channel. These income ranges represent operators who are, in every case, several months to a few years into refining their specific setup. Nobody hits the top of these ranges in their first 30 days. Mealworm colonies take time to reach breeding density. Microgreens buyers take weeks of consistent delivery before committing to a standing order. Isopod cultures take the full 6 to 8 week doubling cycle before population supports regular sales. Shrimp morphs take 1 to 2 breeding generations before the premium colorways show up in any real volume. A nightcrawler bin needs an established colony before harvest volume is worth a standing bait shop order. Dubia colonies need 4 to 6 months to reach breeding maturity before a weekly harvest becomes reliable. And an escargot colony needs a full 6 to 8 month growth cycle before the first snails reach harvest weight at all. If you're building this out yourself, expect the first 2 to 3 months of any single system to look closer to the bottom of its range or below it before it climbs toward what's shown here. This staggered timeline is actually part of why building all 7 systems in sequence rather than all at once works better in practice than it might look on paper. If you launched all 7 simultaneously, you'd be wading through every single one of those maturation windows at the same time, with no revenue coming in from any of them for months, while your total upfront cost sat at its full combined figure from day one. Building sequentially means the revenue from an established mealworm bin is already funding the microgreens rack by the time that rack is ready to build, and the revenue from an established microgreens rack is already funding the isopod shelving by the time isopods are the next logical addition. Each system's maturation window overlaps with the previous system's already productive output, rather than all 7 maturation windows stacking on top of each other with nothing coming in yet. There's a question worth addressing directly before we close this one out, because it comes up on every video like this. Is running 7 separate biological systems in one garage corner actually manageable for one person? Or does the workload compound the way the income does? The honest answer is that it doesn't compound linearly, because the systems share maintenance windows. Checking mealworm bin temperature and moisture takes the same walkthrough as checking the microgreens trays directly above them. Isopod moisture gradients and shrimp tank parameters get checked in the same pass, since they're stacked on adjacent shelves. Across all 7 systems, the operators referenced in this breakdown report a combined daily maintenance window of 40 to 55 minutes plus 3 to 4 hours weekly for harvesting, packaging, and deliveries across whichever systems are due that week. That's a meaningfully different time commitment than 7 completely separate hobbies would require, and it's a direct result of the interconnected design this channel keeps coming back to. One more thing worth naming plainly. Every single one of these 7 systems carries a real failure mode, and this breakdown has walked through each one specifically because ignoring it is what actually ends an operation, not the animal or plant itself. A mealworm colony that gets too cold stops reproducing. A microgreens tray with the wrong nutrient balance grows unevenly and becomes unsellable to a chef who's paying premium wholesale price for consistency. An isopod culture with the wrong moisture gradient can be wiped out overnight by mold. A shrimp tank with unverified water parameters can lose an entire breeding population in the first month. An improperly packed nightcrawler shipment can suffocate before it ever reaches a bait shop. An underventilated roach bin can develop a mite infestation, and an overfed snail colony can collapse to parasites within 2 weeks. None of these are exotic risks. They're the same handful of basic environmental parameters showing up in 7 different forms, and every operator profiled in this video lost at least one early batch learning that lesson before their system stabilized into the numbers shown here. There's one more practical point worth making before we close this one out, since it comes up constantly in the comments on breakdowns like this. What happens to this entire 7-system corner if the power goes out? Several of these systems, the shrimp tanks in particular, depend on filtration and aeration equipment that stops the moment power is lost, and an extended outage can meaningfully damage or wipe out that specific system within a matter of hours. The mealworm, isopod, dubia, and escargot systems are considerably more resilient since none of them depend on powered equipment beyond an optional space heater in colder months, and a brief outage of a few hours poses little real threat to any of them. If you want to see the actual physical layout of a garage corner like this, shelf by shelf, with exact dimensions and exactly how the water and waste transfers work between each system, that's a video this channel is considering putting together as a dedicated build walkthrough separate from this breakdown. Say so in the comments if that's something you'd want to see, and be specific about which of the 7 systems you'd want the closest look at, since that tells this channel far more than a general request for more ever could. If this is the kind of full breakdown you want more of, the real income ranges, the real startup costs, and the real mistakes shown side by side rather than just the highlight numbers, subscribing is the best way to make sure the next one actually reaches you, since this channel publishes a new connected system every single week and, as this whole breakdown has shown, missing one video means missing an entire link in the chain.